Some of them are legitimately saying we're spending way too much money on Ukraine. Why aren't we spending it here?
And what kind of accounting do we have on the money that goes over to Ukraine?
Well, and here's where it's complicated in the sense that we spend a lot of time berating Ukraine for being very corrupt, and it has been. It's been very corrupt, and so that's part of the problem. Is we knew going into this that they had a real corruption issue, right? And then we give them $80+ billion, and we don't necessarily have the best accounting, right? Going back to we're giving $10 billion to Iran, but by God, we're going to know exactly where every penny's spent. No, we're not.
Didn't they catch one guy in Ukraine that embezzled $1 billion and they just fired him? That's it? They didn't arrest him? They didn't?
They've got some of their military personnel now who are responsible for procurement. They've got them in jail and coming up on charges, and they'll probably be convicted. Now, they have to say they've stamped out the problem is ridiculous. Look, Zelensky knows that he's got to be seen as being very aggressive towards corruption because that's going to keep the money flowing, right? Mm-hmm. And he desperately needs that. If he doesn't have U.S. assistance and U.S. aid, this thing goes from being a potential stalemate to it swings the other way in Russia's favor, and not in a really lengthy period of time. So he knows he's got to be seen as doing everything possible to stamp out corruption, and also having the optic of stamping out corruption, right? Regardless of how successful he may be, but it's a real problem for him. And look, the EU is sticking closer to them. I mean, we're getting these cracks in support here in the U.S. The European Union is they're still all in because they're right there, right? And so they understand that you can't let Putin win this. So they're tightening sanctions. Look, the biggest problem we've got is we haven't gone after the energy sector for Russia, just like we really haven't for the Iranians, right? We've the EU implemented what they call an oil price cap. So they said, okay, we'll only allow Russian oil to be sold on the market at $60 a barrel. That's the cap. Well, the Russians figured out pretty quickly, because that's what they're good at how to bust that sanction, right? So they created their own tanker fleet, and they started getting around. And they've initially, when the that oil cap was put in place by the EU, their revenues really dipped. And when oil revenues dip in Russia, Putin can't fuck around, right? He can't do what he's doing. He can't support it. And we haven't been serious about maintaining that. Right? We haven't, because in part it's energy. Europe needs some of that energy, so they got to keep it flowing. But they figured out a way to beat those sanctions, and so they've doubled the amount of money that they made in October compared to September. So they're generating enough to keep the war effort going, is what I'm saying, in a not particularly eloquent way. So yeah, I don't know
and
where.
And then there's the Nord Stream pipeline, right? So Seymour Hersh reported that the U.S. destroyed the Nord Stream pipeline, but now it's being talked that Zelensky and the Ukrainians destroyed it.
Yeah. It looks like what's his name, Javinsky. One of the I forget what his name is, but it does look like, based on the latest reporting, that it was a special operations effort by Ukrainian military, and the reporting is that it was a small team operation, that Zelensky was kept in the dark, in part because they wanted to give him plausible deniability. Mm-hmm. Right? It's not necessarily a good look if they don't, go to the leader and say, well, this is what we're thinking about doing. Do you authorize it? Zelensky probably would have said no. So there's an element of that. They probably thought, well, we think it's a good idea, so we're going to do it. Let's keep him in the dark, and then he can say he didn't know anything about it. But it does look like it was a small team operation. They sailed a boat, maybe 2 boats out there, dove down, blew up the pipeline, and then it's been confusing ever since, right?
How did Seymour Hersh get it wrong?
I don't know. I don't know what his sources were, so I don't want to say anything. He's a very he's a focused and energetic, investigative guy. He's certainly got a lot of experience, so I don't know what his sources were, but there was it was Russia was being blamed. People were saying Russia did it, which was not out of the realm of possible. People were saying it's the U.S. People were saying it's Britain. People were saying it's Ukraine. Everybody was blaming everybody else, and it's still not completely clear, but it does look like it was something that the Ukrainians did. And at the end of the day, that would make sense, I think. But so it still needs a little more clarity. But I think that seems to be where it's going in terms of the reporting. But it's remarkable because February will be 2 years, and we were in Afghanistan for 20 years before people just said, "Fuck it, we're done." Right? We can't do it anymore. This has been 2 years, not even 2 years, and you've got some people in the States going, "Fuck it, we're kind of done." Do we really need to worry about this? And it'd be great to figure out a way to be more efficient with our spending of our money and more transparent with it. But I don't think people should underestimate Putin's ability to keep putting people in the front line and just riding this out, because his calculation, much like it was with Hamas knew what was going to happen with their narrative. I think Putin looks at the West and says, "You'll get tired of this. Right? I'll just outlast you because I don't care." And he's dedicated to rebuilding in some fashion the old Soviet Union.
Aren't they taking prisoners out and giving them what was the report? That they were taking people that had these long-term prison sentences and they were giving them the option to fight in the war, and that they would release them.
That's exactly right. And that's where Yevgeny Prigozhin, who ran the Wagner Group, or was the owner, essentially, of the Wagner Group. And then he died in that completely mysterious plane accident.
After he tried to stage a coup.
Yeah. I don't know what happened.
Odd.
I'm going to look into that, because I'll bet there's
a conspiracy there?
There's a conspiracy there, but I'll bet we could get to the bottom of it.
It says it's unverified, but they are reporting it.
Ukrainian POWs being sent to fight their own army, Russian news claims. Oh, wow. So they're taking Ukrainian POWs.
Oh.
Unverified footage from state media shows captured soldiers swearing allegiance to Russia as a part of the new battalion. Wow. Well, that makes sense.
Well, now it depends on where those folks were taken POW, and it depends, because if they were in eastern Ukraine, remember, then
the Donbass region.
Yeah, the Russians have been there for going on 10 years, and the Russian argument is always, well, these people are more Russian than they are Ukrainian. They actually should be with the motherland. So, you may be talking about folks who got picked up and were like, "Fuck it, I just got conscripted into this. I didn't, not me. I'm Russian, or I consider myself to be Russian."